I
上牌.
上牌 gong.
We're saying
just
Mahjong
shouting
terms.
out terms. Pong.
Oh, I forgot. Okay.
Oh, I forgot how to play Mahjong.
I never knew how to play Mahjong.
Forgot it was called Mahjong because there's barely any Mahjong in it.
Yeah, I did get to the end and wonder why it had this title.
Let's talk about that later.
Yes.
On
I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
On what? You're
On
listening
Deep Cut.
to Deep Cut.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss that director's life and career to bring in context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
If you're enjoying what you just heard, please remember to give us a rating and subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts, as this will help others discover the show. On Apple Podcasts, you can leave a review for the show or comment on our episodes directly on Spotify. You can keep up with us at Deep Cut Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd, and on TikTok at DeepCutPod_film. And if you want to talk about this movie with us or any other film, TV, please join us on our Discord server. And if you're a big fan of the show, we've also recently launched a Patreon if you want to help support us. Click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find our Patreon, Discord, and all the other socials we've mentioned here. Today, we are back to discuss.
This is Mahjong.
This is Matala. Okay. We are here to discuss Edward Yang's 1996 film Mahjong. This is Yang's penultimate film, and he made this after A Confucian Confusion, which we discussed last episode. I think we should just start with fresh reactions.
Oh, reactions, okay.
Yeah. Eli, I want to hear about what you thought of Mahjong.
Yeah, I thought it was all right. Not my fave of Yang's movies. I think I'm missing the takeaway, whereas in other Yang films, I can finish the movie and be like, oh, I know what this was about and what I got from watching this. I'm less certain this time, and I am looking forward to talking about it with you both so that I can get more from it.
Yeah, me too. It feels similarly a little bit out of reach compared to his other films that we've talked about.
Out of reach in what sort? For you?
That's a good way to put it.
I guess I would say that Yang is a lot more obvious with the themes that he's trying to talk about in his other films. And I guess there is a direct link between this and A Confucian Confusion, and I think watching these back to back really helped me understand Mahjong a little more. But I would like to, I guess, talk it out with you guys.
I think thematically they're similar, Confucian Confusion and Mahjong. I think with Mahjong, it feels like he's kind of biting off more than he can chew, because I don't know how much Yang knows about like this kind of gangsterism in Taiwan. You know, he's kind of a city boy, like comes from a fairly privileged background. I don't know whether he's kind of making it up. So there's something a bit phony about some of this characterization.
Yeah.
A little broad in the archetypes that we're seeing. So I was like, I don't know if this makes sense, but still, I would say that the themes, although very kind of broad and obvious and kind of blunt, are quite dense still. And I think he has a lot on his mind, but I just think it's one of his most inelegant films.
Yes,
And
it's
there's
kind of
something
messy.
about it that's just like, I'm just trying this thing out. And I think when you watch that documentary about him and Ho Xiaoxian, he talks about wanting to make an action film. And it seems like Mahjong is the film he's talking about. And I'm like, yeah, I guess this is Edward Yang's version of a thriller suspense action film. But still, not enough has changed for it to really work as an action thriller / suspense film. It still is kind of like halfway a normal Yang film, but also not. So it kind of doesn't know what it is in some way.
Yeah, there are some elements.
It's a little Coensy in some ways.
A little bit. Yeah. Ben, what did you think about this film? You were the only one of us that saw it on 4K. Yeah, the big screen.
Yeah. I mean, it was like still fun to watch. And I think I watched it about a week after Confucian Confusion. I could really feel the similarities in terms of the way they were shot as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It was very much feeling like, oh, Edward. Yang was just Yang was just going like, I'm just gonna do it the normal way. I'm not gonna like think too hard about like how to capture this, like leading more on the scripting and the characters to tell the story and to deliver theme as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think I still enjoyed it to a certain extent and found it to be rewarding. And also I think it was one of the last few Yangs I haven't seen.
Yeah.
So it's nice to complete the set. And I've completed the set, by
Yes,
the way.
congrats, Ben. Oh no, you have not seen Likely Consequence. Have you seen Likely Consequence?
Is that a movie?
It's a filmed play that he's
No,
done.
I don't count that at all, but okay.
You're only counting feature films, yes.
Yeah. There's only 7. I did 7.
Congrats,
Yeah.
Ben.
And I think the other thing is that I think of all his films, aside from Brightest Summer Day, which I have very little recollection of right now, and I will be rewatching real soon, I think it's probably his most cynical film in terms of what he thinks about everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I agree
think
with you.
we talked about likable characters for Confusion. He doesn't like any of his characters here. And I think it's very apparent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found this to be really fun to revisit. I think the last time that I saw this movie was in 2016. So this is, I guess, with That Day on the Beach, this is the Yang that I'm least familiar with. And I watched it really early on. I think I watched it before I saw Taipei's Story or Terrorizers. So, and I don't have a lot of recollection of it. So I think coming back to it, and what I really enjoyed about watching this movie was seeing these actors play off of each other. I'm a big fan of the cast of actors that Yang continues to employ, and it was good to see a lot of familiar faces here, like even having Akeem from A Confucian Confusion show up in a bit part with NJ, Wu Nianzhen, and them playing off of each other was really funny, and I laughed quite a bit. I also thought this was quite funny, actually. Like, it is cynical, but there is, I think Yang turns the dial up a little more, and I guess that's how I can sort of forgive thing you were talking about earlier, Ben, with the characters feeling quite, I guess, on the surface or on the nose, and there's lack of depth. But I think Yang makes them caricatures in this more than any of the other films that I've seen of his, and I think that's how I felt that it was still like quite enjoyable. I think before we get into talking about this movie on a deeper level, we'll do a little plot summary. So I'm going to wing it. Mahjong is about, once again, is about Taipei moving into the 21st century as international hub. And in this movie, you have a cast of Taiwanese actors as well as Western actors. With our Taiwanese band of characters, you have this gang of boys. You have Redfish, the son of a rich businessman who suddenly goes missing with a lot of debt to pay. We have the womanizer, Hong Kong. We have the, I guess, fake feng shui master, but also creep, Little Buddha.
Total creep.
And you have, I guess, the most sympathetic of the gang, Lun Lun. And these boys start the film off as basically as con artists. They're trying to trick people. They're trying to swindle people, rich people, for money. They're trying to trick women to sleeping with all of them. And they sort of get what's coming to them as Martha, this woman from France, swings into their lives, who is connected to these cast of characters that are expats living in Taipei and trying to leech off of Taiwanese people and take all their money because they were unsuccessful in the West. I think that's it, right? I think I covered it
Yeah, pretty much.
to a good extent.
There's also a lot of daddy problems and mommy problems.
Oh, yeah. Much more than Confucian Confusion.
Yeah.
Also, I do this for all the movies, but the Chinese translation, the English translation of the actual Chinese title,
Is?
wait for it, is Mahjong.
Mahjong. He did it. He did it.
And there's barely any Mahjong in this film. Like,
Yeah.
why is it called Mahjong?
Is there any Mahjong in it?
There is. Lun Lun's dad's playing Mahjong in the background of the
yeah.
hostel that he runs
yeah,
with these
yeah.
random expats.
Yeah.
Right.
But why is it called Mahjong?
I think there's something about how Mahjong is a culturally, like it's a cultural export of China. So I think there's something in also colored by the fact that the English title and the Chinese title is the same title, which has not happened before in a Yang film. So I think there's something about the international quality of Mahjong that, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, okay, if I want to be metaphorical about Mahjong, Mahjong's a game about gambling. Mahjong's a zero-sum game.
Yes.
You know, you take money from each other. You do not build wealth. You steal wealth from each other. That's the
Okay.
kind of game Mahjong is.
Yes.
And that's kind of what the game of the film is. Everyone's trying to take stuff from each other. That's it.
Sure.
Yeah, I see it.
I don't know.
I mean, that's the best way I can understand it. Like, that's the
Yeah.
only way I can understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. But I think maybe we can start by talking about the cynicism in this movie, because I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of the relationships that we see expressed in this film are relationships built on transactions. Even more so than A Confucian Confusion, where people are trying to figure out whether they want love or they want money. I think it's clear that for everybody, maybe save for the two people at the end, they're in it for the money. Everyone wants the
Yeah.
fucking money.
Yeah. Like, I think in Confusion, they're trying to lie to themselves that it's not about one or the other thing. Mm-hmm. Right? They're like, no, this is for love, or like, this is for money. No, they get it very confused. But here, I think, we're post that problem. Everyone's already decided relationships are stupid. I'm just here for bread. I just want to make money. Like, everyone's just like, I just want to make money. Yeah, and that's interesting. That's the trajectory that Yang's films are going in.
Everyone's also decided this time around that it's not about transaction, but it's about deceiving each other into getting each other's money.
I think what is most critical about the film is its inclusion of these white characters.
Yeah.
Because clearly there's a commentary about Western civilization creeping into, or rather Western values creeping into Taiwanese society, even more so than a Confucian Confusion. Right? Because that one's about how those values seep into the people. This one's about how those people come in and try and take stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Like doing this kind of like neo-imperialism kind of thing. And Marcus, the character, says it outright that he's here to pillage.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't want to tell people about it. He's like, I'm here to take. And that he knows his privilege as a white person in this Asian country, that he's, for some reason, and this still happens today, afforded this ability to take what he wants
Yep.
in a country that he is not from.
Yep.
And it is a very blunt force instrument use of theme that Yang is doing here, but it is very clear.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, it's useful because by putting those words in Marcus's mouth, it shows that he knows better.
Yeah.
He knows
he knows
exactly what he's doing.
He knows what he's doing.
he does.
Yeah.
He's very tall.
That's his power. His tallness and his receding hairline.
And his weird set of jackets.
Yeah, what is that age difference between Marta and Marcus? That
Yeah.
feels like a wide gap.
It feels like another indictment of Marcus.
Yeah. It's True.
I don't know. I think he just looks old because it's just
Like white people age different.
yeah. Yeah. Like, okay, just complete tangent. I was looking at IMDb of the cast, and these kids still look the same. The Taiwanese characters look the same.
Yeah.
Like the IMDb photos, they look so like they have not aged 10 years, 20 years. Anyway.
They've aged, at least the kids have aged from A Brighter Summer Day to this.
Yes.
Like, Cat, like little Buddha is old, man.
Yeah.
He's a child. He's a child in A Brighter Summer Day.
But that's puberty.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. I think another way that it is expressed, right, is that Metro Company, Matra, which they start calling Marta, which is this French company that came into Taipei and is charging the Taiwanese a ridiculous amount to build this subway system.
That doesn't work.
Yeah, that doesn't work. So that's a perfect encapsulation of what Yang sees the role of white people in Taipei as. But I think as a counter to that, you have Ginger, who came to Taipei as doing sex work and basically came up doing sex work. And I guess that is also one of the decisions that Marth has to contend with when presented an opportunity from Ginger and Redfish, who was more than willing to let her do that. And it was only the actions of Lun Lun that gets her out.
I think it's telling that sex work is like somewhat like on the foreground of this, even though we don't really see it. And I write somewhat facetiously that capitalism is just prostitution of more steps. But this is what this film is about. Like everyone's pimping someone else out. Like literally and figuratively. And sometimes the goal is also to use the money to get sex.
Yeah.
So then at the end of the day, everyone's just trying to get sex.
Leveraging each other's labor and bodies. Yeah.
So then the labor of sex work is also the goal sometimes. So it's kind of like almost like sex is interchangeable with monetary value in this film. Right? Because when you think about when Redfish sees Mart, he's like, oh my God, this is a hot white person and this is our ticket.
Yeah.
You know? Like, and this is not a scam they've done before. This is not part of their Little Buddha scam. He's just like, I'm just going to become a pimp. Like, that's so natural to him. Like, I'm going to become a pimp. And that's going to make me money somehow. And there's this strangeness to how sex work is in this film, but like invisible, that I find a bit odd sometimes. Because everyone talks about it in such a casual way, but like, because we don't see it necessarily, except for Hong Kong, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah.
I think the ability for him to really comment about sex work is not really there because he clearly is not equipped. He, as in Yang, is not really equipped to talk about sex work really.
Yeah.
In the way that he's attacking it.
Yeah.
Although, interestingly enough, I would say that Hong Kong's role is that even though his whole thing is that he's this guy that can apparently seduce any woman. Like, he's just 100%, it's going to work. What's interesting is that that's what he does. And like, he is essentially also doing sex work for the goal of conning people.
Yeah.
Right? And I found it very interesting to think about because like, he thinks he's just like using it to scam people, but he's actually performing sex work as labor for Redfish, who's like his gang leader.
Yeah, and he kind of comes to realize that.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
At the end, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think him being put in the position that he puts Allison in the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
And basically being told the same things that he tells the women that he sleeps with is a harsh reckoning for Hong Kong. And he spends the rest of the film crying and messed up. You can't console him. But I think there's that trajectory of that character is, I would say, it is quite on the surface. Like I wouldn't say it's my favorite out of all
it's not
the characters, but I think it helps that Changchen is like eye candy and like looks really good in this because of the lack of depth in the storyline itself.
Yeah, the storyline is built in a way that lacks a lot of depth because for me, I really struggle with understanding Allison as a character because she just seems so dumb in a way that just made no sense. And we're also supposed to understand her as like the key to how Marcus earns his wealth. But the way that she just throws herself onto Hong Kong is confusing and then is so easily conned into this arrangement with him and his buddies. I found very hard to suspend my disbelief for, even though this is a pretty broad comedy in some respect.
Right.
I think that just doesn't work from a writing perspective.
That scene at the start where he cons her is kind of, it's just nasty. It's not, I don't think it's
really
good
hard to watch.
Yeah.
It's not nice to watch. Yeah.
I think it's not nice to watch also because her reaction doesn't make sense, you know?
The thing that's hard to swallow about that scene for me is that I kind of feel like Young is positioning you to be in on the joke, to recognize that these boys are working together to deceive Allison into sex. And even if you're not supposed to laugh at that itself, you being in on the plan while Allison is out of it puts you in a very uncomfortable plane of knowledge as compared to her.
I mean, it's a scene of sexual coercion, which you are like kind of complicit in, which is like very hard to watch. And I think that's like the main big criticism for the film for most people.
Right.
That its treatment of women and its writing of women is not good. And I think even though he does this reversal at the end, the surface level of this whole thing just doesn't give it enough weight to really like make it worth this at all.
It feels even like a reversal for the sake of, ooh, look, this is a reversal. Like all of a sudden, Mautre is holding a gun to the gangster's head, and whoa, you didn't expect that.
Yeah. I think the way that the three older women who then take advantage of Hong Kong at the end, although yes, it reverses the way that Hong Kong views himself, it doesn't do enough, and also it's played so broadly that it's not really a lesson that he's learning. It's more like a ha-ha kind of thing. But then if this is a ha-ha kind of thing, then that also means that what happens to Allison is a ha-ha kind of thing, which it is, played as.
It is,
And so that whole thing just like feels very icky on both ends, whichever way, whoever is the victim, that it doesn't feel nice to watch at all.
Yeah, it's still laughing at coercion.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way because
that's important.
it is important because I think it is quite a clear misstep. I think I don't know. I just don't think that it works that well, and I don't like. Maybe it didn't age well, but I think if I saw it in the 90s, it would also feel weird. Yeah,
but I'm sure there's a lot of like this kind of not this kind, but this type of sexual humor in Chinese TV and film that is not very, I guess PC is the right word for it today. I would say that like local TV shows handle notions of like sexual consent horribly in the 90s and early 2000s, like horribly. Yeah, so I think it's not forgivable, but it's just like part of what the culture was like at that point. Yeah.
Do you think that this is part of Young going more commercial on purpose, as we've been talking about?
Possible. I think he's kind of trying to do like something with the action, with the gangster stuff. Like it's all like commercial stuff, right? This is what people want to see in the movies. You see the poster for this, there's a gun in it. The gun is so unimportant to the film.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Except for that burst of violence at the end.
Yep, exactly.
Yes,
but generally speaking, it's not that important to the functioning of the entire film. Yeah. I think when you look at the tightness that we talked about in Confucian Confusion, this one's like so loose. When I was watching it, the first hour, I was like, what is this movie really about? Because I was reading the synopsis and I was like, oh, this man is supposed to be kidnapped, the kid, Redfish. I was like, when's he going to get kidnapped?
Yeah.
Like, never. I was like, I thought this is the premise. And even this whole like wrong person gets kidnapped, like that happens so late in the game. So then so much of the film is about people like saying stuff to each other and like saying the thematic material to each other that it is just not as elegant as Confucian Confusion.
To your point, Ben, I have a question about that thematic reminder that pops up in dialogue every so often.
Yeah.
which is people saying to each other that nobody knows what they want, and therefore you can tell them what they want and they'll do what you want. And I don't know if I see that really enacted in the film so much as it is discussed.
I see what you're saying. Although I do like the sentiment behind what people are saying. Not saying that I agree with. I'm saying that it's what they see in the world, right?
It's fittingly cynical.
Yeah. I do agree that I don't know if it is what's in the film, because the way they con each other isn't about how they tell people what they want. It's about tricking people.
Yes, exactly.
Right? It's more about deception rather than coercion, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, there is some coercion. We just talked about sexual coercion, but I don't really think that's the same thing.
Even then, it's the characters who are doing the coercing are saying, I want you to do this for me. It's not, as the dialogue is drawing attention to, people being convinced that what they want is what someone else wants.
Like, you think about the scam of the little Buddha. It's not that they are telling people they need this feng shui reading. It's that they convince people that they're able to do feng shui reading. So they're not actually inducing a want. They're fulfilling a want.
It's not Inception.
Yeah, it's not Inception. They're not inducing a want, but they're pretending that they can fulfill the want.
Right.
Even though they can't do it. Like, their feng shui is not real, but they create an environment that people believe that they can do what they do.
Right.
And that's what everybody's doing.
Yes.
Right. Like, that's how I think it's implied that that's how somebody like Ginger is able to get ahead in Taiwan. Like, she's able to climb the ladder, and people think that she is this corporate professional, but actually she started off as a sex worker. Right.
Yeah.
And then Jay is the one that calls her out on that. Yeah.
It seems to have consumed everyone in this film. Like, Redfish also, that is the way that he earns his gang money. That's how they con people. But I think that's even how Redfish's dad has become a very successful but much sought after businessman, is because he's conning young parents out of money. But I would say that the way that Yang approaches Redfish's dad makes it seem like he wants out. Well, he does get an out. He does get an out, but
Right.
but he wants.
He realizes the error of his ways.
Yeah, initially he wants out of this capitalist society, basically, and falls in love with his teacher and seems to want to enjoy the kinder things in life and not pursue people for their money, but also ends up killing himself and his lover. So I guess I want to ask, what do you think that says? Or what do you think Yang's trying to say with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about the two primary scenes we get with the dad. The first is when Redfish is called upon by his father to come over to his dad's apartment. He comes over and he's instantly nitpicking his dad's material objects and saying, "Oh, you're hiding out in such luxury."
Playing Beethoven.
playing Beethoven.
Which is a
he has
very
this
funny
grand
line.
piano in his hideout. It's this very, all white, lavish, modern apartment. And as Redfish is talking about these things, you don't see the father in the frame.
Oh, yeah.
And finally, when you do see the dad in the frame, he says, Redfish has been asking, why'd you call me here? Like, in what way are you trying to take advantage of me now? Or teach me about how to take advantage of other people now? And the dad says, I wanted to see you. And Redfish doesn't buy it. He says, come on, there's got to be something else. There's women, you need something. And at that point in the movie, I don't believe the dad either, because I see the son and his behavior and the product of the father's actions. Then you get a second warning when the father's love interest, this teacher, comes and talks to Redfish in a restaurant in a similarly earnest way about, your dad actually cares about you. Redfish doesn't buy it. At that point, I'm sort of starting to sense something is drifting. And then in the third scene where we see the actor who plays the father it's when his body is discovered in his apartment. And similarly, the characters arrive, including Redfish, into the apartment. They break in, and we get a 30 to 45 second shot of them coming into the apartment and finding the father's body. And you know it's his body, but Young does not show you the body on screen until almost a minute into the scene. Mm-hmm. So this withholding of the father's visage on screen feels like an indication of the authenticity of his claim that he does want out of this system. Mm-hmm. He's extricating himself from the movie in several senses and trying to hide out from the camera's eye in a way that the other characters you could perhaps argue are not.
Yeah.
You are convincing me that suicide works. Because previously I was thinking, this doesn't make sense. What is the reason? It seems so hard to understand. But I think that works now because the fact that we don't really understand why he does it fully. Because it's such a drastic decision, right? But because it supposedly happens that he really does kill himself with his partner, that clearly they're thinking of something so far off what these other characters are thinking of, that this seems logical to these characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which presents them as people who are completely on a different wavelength already. And that helps me to understand the inclusion here, that it does make sense that this is included, that it is such an antithesis to how everyone else in the film is operating.
Yeah.
The clearest understanding I have of a nuanced theme in this movie that actually carries through on itself is the relationships to the parent figures. Redfish to his mom, Redfish to his dad, and in a sense, Hong Kong to Angela.
Oh. Yes.
Wait, what?
Mommy issues?
I know that they're in a kind of Oedipal way where Hong Kong is expecting to have power over this older woman, and she turns out to be able to hold her own, and it breaks him totally.
Yeah.
It feels like a similar kind of generational misunderstanding that Young loves to deploy in a way that is not literally parental, but a little bit Oedipal kind of. Do you see what this makes sense?
I know what you're trying to say. I think also, thinking about Confusion as well, this film also has a family business being passed down. It also has this generational thing going on with business.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have Redfish learning about how to make money from his father, although he doesn't necessarily take over the business, but he has this kind of knowledge transfer between the older generation and younger generation in terms of how to accumulate wealth. You have that also with Allison, much more in the background, but she's the heir to some sort of wealth that we understand.
Right.
But she's kind of squandering on she's just doing whatever she does, which doesn't really make sense. And the sexual relationship between Hong Kong and Angela is that he is kind of learning something from her about relationships. So there's also that kind of knowledge transfer. And are there other notions of this? I can't remember. But Confusion more clearly has that kind of handing down of the company, people passing down generational wealth. And it's very interesting that there's so many of these types of characters in young films. There are people who are taking over something. Taipei Story has this.
Oh, right.
Yep.
As well.
Terrorizers as well.
And yeah, I had a friend who was talking about how young films are all about upper middle class people, and she was can't stand that. And I was I get it. Yeah, but it's also because that reflects Yang's upbringing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably the kinds of people that he knew and the kinds of experiences that he's able to either experience himself or to observe around him.
Right.
This is a classic case of depiction not being endorsement. I get maybe not being able to want to watch movies about the upper middle class, but Young depicts it with a lot of incisive critique and empathy.
Yeah.
So just because it is focused on the upper middle class, I mean, you all know that I love Succession. So.
I don't think... it's not necessarily a criticism. It's just that sometimes it's just, it's all about that. Like there's no other lens that he's looking at. But I guess it's fine because that's the lens that he has. So
Exactly.
it's easier
Yeah.
for him.
And if
Yeah.
you're searching for something else, just watch something else. I don't know.
Yeah.
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 I have one more thing to the Oedipal.
Yes.
I'm ringing that bell too much this episode. But
Go for it.
after Hong Kong and Angela have sex for the first time, Hong Kong reaches for these buns and spills them all over the floor and then is just like chowing down on them, like eating 3 in a row.
Yeah.
Like Chong Chen, apparently one of the best on-screen eaters. You know, people say this about like Brad Pitt. He's always eating in his movies.
Really?
And then Angela notices this and says, "Are you hungry?" And then when it comes time for Angela and her friends to take advantage of Hong Kong, that feeding becomes an act that is twisted, where they start overfeeding him to the point that he spits out his food onto the floor and starts crying. It's like a twist on the type of maternal care that becomes
Right.
conflated with sexuality in
Right.
how Hong Kong interacts with Angela.
She does talk about him eating her if he's hungry instead.
That too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very blunt.
On the one hand, Hong Kong is expecting one type of power interaction from this older woman that gets twisted against him. On the other, we have Redfish expecting a certain type of modeling of male power from his father that his father then does not model, which totally sends Redfish off the deep end.
Yeah.
And he shoots his father's country club friend
Yeah.
in the end of
Oh
the
my
movie.
god. Should we talk about that scene?
Sure.
Should we talk about the burst of violence?
Yeah. How do we not talk about that scene?
The red and green light.
Yeah. Because actually there's just two sudden kind of like rug pulls. And I talk about rug pulls a lot in the way Yang ends films. And I think the
Right.
first one we already talked about, which is the suicide, which is quite surprising. But also darkly comic. I really love NJ's beat about like he's like, don't touch the body, nobody does it. I've not killed anyone. It's like, wait, what? Like he's the guy that's running with a gun anyway. And then the scene where Redfish confronts his dad's country club friend and then learns that it is not that he should be looking for money from this friend because this friend is just as broke as his dad used to be.
Yes.
And also learning that the Angela that he's been trying to con is not the Angela that conned his family of all their money. Because obviously, there's like 1,000 bajillion
Angelas
Angelas and
from Hong
Allisons
Kong.
in Hong Kong. So many. They love A names. So many. So, yeah, like, and actually, I mean, he's holding a gun and you would think it might be coming, but it was a very surprising turn of events to see him finally shoot this man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is
Like,
it is Yang's most overt vision of violence in his filmography. I think it's up there with the A Brighter Summer Day ending, but I think the shooting and the repeated shooting makes it kind of wild to me that it's here, and the fact that it's that the camera tracks back and they move further into frame so that they're both in a wide shot when this act happens, that Yang is like, I'm gonna make you watch this whole thing and I'm not cutting and I'm not showing it from a different angle. You're gonna see it as it is, and I guess maybe the only saving grace from, I guess, what you're seeing on screen is the fucking frame activation in the background with the light changing colors. And you,
it's not very good frame activation. Sorry, Mr. Yang. It's a bit blunt and deliberate.
but I think there's some sort of signaling there. I don't think Yang is stupid in a stylistic way that he is not gonna single this scene out with its frame activation to indicate that, I don't know, you're about to see something horrible or you're about to see something violent. You guys don't look like you agree with me, so it's
No,
fine.
I was gonna say, no. Plus, in our Taipei story episode, we talk about how he understates violence a lot, or brings violence in ironically. This is not ironic in any way. This is very like, here's a guy shooting another guy. Like, it's his version of an
passionate,
action
it's
film.
spontaneous.
Yeah. There is no extra layer that he brings to this. There is no like accidental, there's no learning about violence from another person. It's just, here's the violence. It's extremely immediate violence, and that flashing light in the back is also extremely immediate in a very in your face way. This is a very in your face depiction of violence, which he tends to not do. Like, even Terrorizers, which has violence, the violence is understated. We have knives. The shootouts happen, but it's almost dreamlike. This one is so in your face. And in the restoration, like the gunshots, it's like the whole screen flashes and like shakes.
Yeah.
And I feel like it happens in post. I think it happens in post.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know. I was just like, wow, this is so elegant. But maybe that's the point. Maybe this is just like the most outward expression of rage that Yang can bring within his style.
It's like an angry young man pulling the trigger in order to make someone else feel the pain that he feels.
Yeah.
Which it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard not to compare it with what Xiao Shi does at the end of A Brighter Summer Day. That trajectory that Redfish has, where it's like anger and resentment towards older generations or stuff out of his control starts boiling over, is very similar to how we see Xiao Shi. Well, I don't know. Maybe like, I guess the characters' positioning are a little different, but I think the trajectory and the where they both end up is quite similar.
Yeah. I agree.
Should we talk about the core romantic couple in this, which we have not talked about at all?
Oh, yeah. Right.
I'm like looking at my notes and I'm like, wow, we haven't touched on either of these two characters at all, which is the pairing of Lun Lun and Mart. What do you feel about this couple and how this romance develops, or if we could call it a romance?
You're so I thought it was sweet. I thought it was very, very sweet. And I think it helps that Virginie Ledoyen is so beautiful.
Fucking smoking, dude. I was like,
yeah.
I would do the same thing. Ditch all my bros.
Risk it all for this girl from France.
It's sweet, but I think similarly surface level to some of the other characterizations in the movie.
Yes, but I'm willing to forgive because I think there's just there's natural chemistry. And okay, bringing it up 2 times in 2 episodes, this also reminds me of Hong Sang-soo, because we have 2 characters trying to connect with each other, both using their second languages. And a lot of Hong's work with French actress Isabelle Huppert shows her in Korea interacting with Korean folks with an intermediary of English. And I think that those interactions and the interactions with Redfish, where you see Lun Lun deciding what to translate and what not to translate, is very cute, and I was sold. Yeah, it was fun in a Hong Sang-soo kind of way. Just knows how to push my buttons.
It's kind of a bright spot in a film that's extremely cynical.
Yes.
So we talked a little bit at the start of the episode, which is that coming from Confusion, which is like, this film is like, feelings are bad, and then essentially what's happening with Lun Lun is that he gets feelings, he catches feelings, and then that's the reason he's so-called weak in the eyes of his friends.
Yes.
Right, because everyone's denounced feelings, this gansing that we talked about as well.
Yeah.
And then this man just catches feels like immediately, because of course he would. And that is kind of his downfall, but also what redeems him a little bit at the end for himself anyway.
Yeah. And in the eyes of the movie.
Yeah, so I think in that sense, they work. And it's saying that feelings aren't actually bad. But But when Mark leaves Marcus, I was kind of surprised because I thought this film would end in a cynical way. So when it came that Mark came back to look for Lunan, I really, really didn't buy it. And I will say, seeing these two make out in 4K was extremely awkward.
Really?
Yeah, like
There's a lot
that
of
kiss scene
open
is-
mouth
That
interaction.
scene's really long. And it's like, this man has never kissed a woman in his life, and the first woman he's gonna kiss is this woman. And I was like, holy shit. Like, that is the feeling you get watching this film. I was like, oh. Yeah, anyway, so, but I think it has that feeling of this is Yang giving what the audience wants,
Yeah.
right? This commercialization of his film.
Yeah.
Where, of course, if you think of it in the vein of Taipei Story or Terrorizers, this would never happen.
Yeah.
Like, why would he give you this? That makes no sense.
And he
know?
also sort of does it in A Confucian Confusion. You have two very pointed reunification moments, romantic, even to push back against what you said last episode, Ben. I'm gonna call it a romantic reunification. So ending these two films on romantic reunifications, whereas the other ones, Terrorizers, Taipei Stories, all end in sadness. And A Brighter Summer Day, sadness. This, with these two and Yi Yi, end in hope and in love, and like despite the whole world coming down and everyone's brainwashed into capitalism, you have a spark of hope in this life. And I think that's beautiful. I think, Yang believes in a few people in the world.
Honestly, I'm quite thankful he decided to like get a dose of optimism in his late career. Because I think if he didn't, I would never I think if he didn't, Yang would not have the kind of adulation that he has right now. Because that optimism is infectious, and that optimism is what people are looking for in films.
Yeah.
And like, imagine if E ended on a bum note. Holy crap. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's his ability to do both.
Yes.
To hold both side by side, and Yi is the ultimate example of that.
Yeah.
Because it flirts with sadness, with total despair and total joy in sometimes the same breath.
Yeah. So I feel like you see that trajectory from Confucian Confusion when he starts to like understand, and he starts to get this dose of optimism, and then starts tuning his films towards audience enjoyment, but without necessarily giving up the thematic considerations that he has, and he's still packing in there.
Right. It is an interesting but also sad exercise to do, to think about the rest of a career that Yang could have had if he didn't pass away so suddenly in 2007. And I think these two films are most telling for me about what are the possibilities of what Yang cinema could have ventured into in the 21st century. And yeah, it's sad. It's just sad to think about.
I mean, since we're on the topic of like what he could have done, the exhibition at AFA shows you what he was working on, which is that he was actually working on animated films because he loves animation and manga and manhwa. So he was working on, I guess it looks like a kid's film. You know?
Wow.
Like, it's about like a boy and his dog set in the like traditional China or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was moving towards less serious subject matter in a sense. Right. And I think he had been developing those animation projects for a while until his unfortunately untimely death.
I think while watching Mahjong, I found myself thinking about how much he forecast about the 21st century and then didn't really get to see what he predicted accurately, I think, come to pass, both good and bad. Yeah.
I remember now what I wanted to say before when I was talking about Western values and imperialism, which is that this is a film about grifters, and a lot of American films are about grifters.
Yeah.
And this is something I talk about sometimes, which is that America is the land of the grifter. Even more so today than any day. in
Gee,
its
what are you
history.
talking about?
Yeah. And there are so many films about the great American grift. And
Yeah.
this film is about a bunch of grifters, con artists, and how this thing that they say, which is that people don't know what they want, you need to tell them what they want. This is partially part of the grift. This is partially part of the con. Like telling people what they want when they don't actually need what you are telling them that they want is how you get people to spend money on shit they don't need and time on things that are not worth their time.
But also the belief that you can convince people what they want and need and should
Yeah.
spend money on is that mass belief is part of what keeps the cruelties of capitalism running.
Yeah.
And if maybe a charitable reading of Mahjong is that that belief doesn't come to be effective, really. And if everyone gave up that belief,
That you can't convince people.
yeah, how successful is that act of convincing in this movie ultimately, really?
But everyone, most of them still seem bought in.
I think
But they don't persuade each other super effectively in the end. The only ones who succeed are the ones who aren't trying to grift, Martre and Lunlun.
although I don't know if I would count what happens to them as success rather than just
They have
escaping
a
from
big
the
sloppy
machine.
open mouth kiss.
Yeah, but then what else? They're gonna eat Tong Yoping for the rest of their lives. Like, come on. Like, I don't think you can live off that shit. Yeah. I think even Confusion also like taps into this because they work in this advertising agency and like this whole like romance program they're on that they produce is also about kind of tricking people into thinking about love and wanting love in a certain way.
They're selling emotion.
Yeah, and the books that guy writes are also things selling ideas, right? Convincing people of the importance of his ideas. Yeah, I think in Mahjong, the problem is that it is so like, I just want money. It is so one-track minded in their pursuit of wealth that the grift becomes so inelegant that it isn't really about tricking people's beliefs, and it's more just tricking people.
Yeah.
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 In Confucian Confusion, you mentioned something about the title meaning independent era.
Yeah.
I just had a realization.
What?
So when the author gets hit by the car and walks off having had an epiphany, and he says, I'm out of my romantic era, I'm also out of my dour Confucian era, and now I'm in my... And he sort of trails off and doesn't have a term for what era he's in. Independent era could fit it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could be. The old him is
Maybe
dead,
Young
right?
was going into his independent era in the 21st century.
Also, to be clear, he hit a car.
Yeah.
The cab driver is so funny in that.
That's all I got for this film, honestly.
That's
Same.
also all I got for this film. Yeah, with Confusion, these two are like the true deep cut picks from Yang.
But they do really speak to each other in interesting ways. They are
really
about
do.
the same thing, really.
Yeah, and I think talking about Yang's filmography from a chronological standpoint, I know we started with Yi, but I think, yeah, tackling these chronologically is helping me understand Yang's concerns as a filmmaker, like his thematic concerns. And I don't think that they were not that clear when I was previously watching his films. So I think this was very, very helpful in fleshing out Yang as a filmmaker and just as a thinker.
I agree. It's really fun to look at a cross-section of a filmmaker's work, if not their entire body of work, which we've now done. This is our second time doing that, right?
Yes,
Sisako
Sisako.
and
Yeah.
Yang.
Speaking of, we got to get on that. We're not done yet
Oh,
with
yeah.
Sisako. So,
Right.
thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating because that helps others discover the show. A really great way to support us is to leave a review for our show on Apple Podcasts or comment on our episodes directly on Spotify if you have thoughts about the movie we just talked about. We will definitely read them and we can maybe respond to you in a future episode. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. And you can keep up with us on Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at DeepCutPod, and TikTok at DeepCutPod_film. You can also join us to talk about movies on our Discord server. We also have a Patreon. If you want to support us, we deeply appreciate it. Click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find our Patreon, Discord, and all the other socials we've mentioned here. A special shout out to a Patreon Deep Cut Pick supporter, Leah Lai. Thank you. Without you, the show would not be non-existent.
In many respects.
Well, I am thinking about the day that this doesn't happen anymore, and I can't say that we can't do this show without you.
It would still be true.
Okay, true. Deep Cut is hosted and produced by us, Wilson Lai, Benjamin Yap, and Eli Sands. And our cover art is designed by Justina Yam, and our theme song is composed by the one and only Eli Sands. I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.